Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and the other day the UK government took the first steps towards easing the lockdown restrictions that have been in place due to the coronavirus. The devolved governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have decided to keep their restrictions as they were. But in England we are now allowed to travel and actually meet people as long as we stick to the new guidance, which is still quite strict. Now, one person from one household is allowed to go and visit one other person from another household as long as while you're meeting you maintain a 2 metre distance between you. So I thought I would take this opportunity to go back down to see my friend Rob, who along with his wife is building a Zetec Turbo 100E project.
Quick pit stop. Rob's asked me to bring some tools with me. Let's go. Back down the workshop with Rob.
Hello everyone.
And of course his 100E project. Now if you haven't seen the other video we made on this car, definitely go and check it out. I'll put a link at the top of the screen now and we'll see you back here afterwards. But for those of you who did watch the last video, you'll remember that we saw Rob removing the diff from the rear axle, and the axle was a bit of a topic of discussion in the comments because it's a English axle. Now plans have changed slightly with the car, or more delayed in terms of the engine, so that might mean that the rear axle will last a little bit longer. But Rob has actually already sourced a stronger axle from a Volvo 960, is it? Which will obviously need to be modified to be fitted to the 100E, but hopefully that will be able to take all the torque that he is planning to put through it in the future. But hopefully with the temporary setup that Rob's now going to be going with in terms of the engine, the English axle should do him for now. Now, literally a couple of days after I was down here last, Rob had the diff welded and it's now been refitted into the axle. Rob has been buying parts since the last time we saw the car, including a roll cage. That's the rest of it down there. Rob has been spending some time today just sort of mocking up the cage, see how well it fits, but yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Right, so Rob now has an engine in the bay for mock-up purposes. Those of you who watched the last video remember that Rob was going to be using a silver top Zetec with forged pistons and rods, but as I mentioned a minute ago, plans have changed slightly. The current idea is to run this ST170 engine just with a decomp plate, so you know, a much lower boost setup than what he wants eventually, which should, as we just said, mean that the gearbox and the rear axle might last a bit longer. Realistically, if you had 400 or 500 horsepower in a 100E, you would need slicks to get that power to the ground. And then that means you're even more likely to blow your diff or your gearbox. Now, Rob was going to have a turbo manifold fabricated, but he's actually been working on making his own turbo manifold. And here is the turbo. It wasn't here when I was here last. It's a GT30 turbo. Rob has also got hold of this inlet since the last time I was down here. He did have a bit of an issue with it. It was a little bit too long and it was fouling on the bulkhead here, but he's chopped the back off so it now fits and just needs to weld a disc onto the back of that. So yeah, that's the inlet sorted. Now the engine mounts were fitted to the silver top. A couple of the holes did have to be bored out and you had to cut some material away from one of them. Yeah, on the passenger side one, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the bolt holes for the engine mounts are slightly different on silver tops and black tops, but yeah, it's all bolted in now. One thing I think is quite interesting with this setup is that it's actually got a front bowl sump. Now, this car is running Escort crossmember and stuff, so I think in theory you could have a rear bowl sump, but was this the sump that came with the silver top? Yeah? I'm not really sure, but I think the front bowl sumps might be because the 100E normally has a steering box. Another thing that's changed in terms of the plans for this car is the colour scheme. You're going to be going for black with lime green accents now. I think 100Es look good in any colour, like you just can't go wrong. It looks cool now, like with silver and black doors. Let's have a look at the cage. Now most of it is all just straight pipe, you know, I'd imagine you got to notch them and stuff before you weld them in. But the only bits that have sort of come with bends in are these door bars and the main hoop. And the main hoop looks like it goes in all right. Rob's got it under tension with a ratchet strap. And then he was trying to figure out how these door bars go. Yeah, so if you've got like this somewhat following the door aperture there and then the A-pillar lined up, it seems like that bend there has been bent a bit too much. It looks like if you could open up that bend slightly, then it would meet the main hoop there where it's supposed to. We did have it lined up with the top of the door there, with the, you know, this bar going up higher, but then obviously this was all out and it was, you know, sticking out like this. Rob's going to speak to the company that supplied this cage because there might be something that we're missing. So yeah, to be continued with the cage, but if any of you out there have got a 100E with a roll cage in it, if you want to send some pictures to my social media that I can then pass on to Rob, that'd be a great help. Next job on the list for this car is to fit the decomp plate to the ST170 engine. Rob's just removing the turbo manifold and the inlet. And over here we have the decomp plate and 2 head gaskets. Rob picked those bits up from eBay. Before Rob can remove the cylinder head, he needs to remove this sort of stud with a nut on it down there. And then once the engine is turned over so that it's at TDC, he can put this pin in instead of it, which will lock the crank. And also when the engine's at TDC, this bar here will slide into the slots in the back of the cams and lock the top end. I'm not sure if you need to lock the top end because you're going to be taking the cylinder head off, but we'll do it anyway. And then we'll remove the cam belt. Yeah, I've never actually removed the cylinder head from Zetec. I've only ever done it on Pintos and Crossflows, so I'm learning as I go. Right, so it seems like the sump might be rubbing on the crank maybe. There isn't a gasket fitted, so maybe that's why. Hopefully, just crack the sump bolts off slightly and then that'll give the engine enough room to spin. Right, change of plan. Rob's going to drag this engine out and get it back on the stand. Yeah, there's no real obvious signs where anything was rubbing on this sump. Once we get the engine on the stand, we'll have a look at the crank, see if there's any signs on that where it was rubbing. Nothing ever goes smoothly, but makes it more interesting. Right, so the lump is now on the stand. And actually, it didn't need to stay in the engine bay any longer because Rob knows where he's at with his turbo manifold. And as I explained earlier, he's already modified the inlet manifold as well. And there is the piece that he chopped off. So he just needs to weld a disc over that and that's sorted. Now that the engine's on the stand, it's obviously a lot easier to get the head off. So let's crack on with that. So now we can turn the engine round until the bar goes into the back of the cams. Now hopefully that pin should screw in without any issue. If Rob removes the bar from the cams, now because the pin's in the bottom end, in theory it shouldn't move at all now when he tries to turn it over. Sweet, yeah? Stick the bar back. Oh, do we need to stick the bar back in? Because you're going to be taking the cams out, aren't you? Yeah. Alright, so making progress now. Obviously all the cam belt and stuff's off. Got the camshafts here, and then all the caps, I suppose they're called, all lined up. You've got to keep them in order. And they've got to go back in the engine in the same order that they came out. What's next then, Rob? Head bolts, is it?
Just head bolts.
Head bolts. Cylinder heads off. Can't see any holes in any of the pistons, which is always a good sign. Got the cylinder head on the bench. Rob's just removing the thermostat housing, and then we can stand the head up. Right, so there's a head gasket. No signs of there being a blown head gasket, which is always good to see. And here's the cylinder head, all looking pretty good. 2 valves in each cylinder are black and 2 valves in each cylinder are not. So yeah, that all looks how it should be. Yeah, me and Rob were just discussing about the breather setup. Now on my cars, I have the original flame trap, which basically goes into the block there. And then this thing here is a PCV valve, which opens with engine vacuum, and that goes into the end of there. Now what I do is I gut these, so if you just cut the end off, there's like a spring and stuff in there, and just take the insides out, and I basically just use this as an adapter to go into there, like I just showed you. The problem Rob's got is he's going to have his turbo here, so he doesn't actually have room for the original flame trap. But he does have this plate, which will bolt there, but he's probably going to weld on a fitting, so that then he can plumb this to his catch can. Yeah, when you're running turbo, you need to save space by using this. And here is Rob's catch can. Looks pretty smart. Got 2 inlets, so you'll have one coming from the block where I just showed you, and one coming from the rocker cover. And then this is the breather for it, which I assume goes in there. And that's obviously some sort of blanking bung for if you don't want to run a breather. With the cylinder head over here on the bench and the block over there on the stand, that means that Rob can clean up that gasket face and I can clean up this gasket face. I think I'll get these head bolts out of the way and start cleaning this cylinder head face up. Bit of brake cleaner. Just going to give it a tickle with really fine sandpaper. It's like 1200, so it's not going to dig in or anything. It's literally just going to take any little traces that are left. I think that's good enough. It looks like Rob's just about done cleaning the block face as well. So on goes the first head gasket, then comes the decompression plate. Whee.
Brand new head bolts.
Right then, 90 degrees on each one.
I was told 90 degrees, then an extra 45.
Really?
Yeah.
Give him an extra 45 degrees, he said. It'd be fun, he said. I reckon they're all pretty even. Right, that's the cylinder head all fitted and torqued up. Time to get the cams in now. Right, so that's the cams all refitted. Rob hasn't actually torqued up the cam caps because this torque wrench only goes down to 30 foot-pounds. He's slackened off the pulleys to make life easier when it comes to getting the engine back in time, and the timing bar is in the back of the cam. So yeah, it's all set to TDC, just get the cam belt on now. So my battery's died, so I'm on the iPhone. On Rob's GoPro now. Right, so now the timing tools have been removed. Rob's just going to whack the spark plugs out, makes it a lot easier to turn the engine over. Right, now put the pin in the block and then tap the bar out and just make sure that it won't turn at all. Yeah? Sweet as. Right, so with this little stud and nut thing back in the block, that's it all back together. Just got to nip up the cover for the VVT pulley. And there's the decompression plate there. And it's just got a head gasket either side. Which basically lowers the compression a bit so that you can run a turbo setup with the stock pistons. But the ST170 pistons and rods are a bit different than Zetec ones. Apparently they're stronger, but nothing like a proper set of forged pistons, like what Rob's got in this silver top bottom end, which is the planned 400 bhp plus engine.
Hopefully.
Eventually. I'm just going to turn it upside down, just in case we can see any signs of where the crank may have been rubbing on the sump earlier. There is some marks on the crank here. Now obviously this was fitted to the engine without a gasket before, so it might literally just be that, and it might be these welds. That would be handy if you could just grind them down a bit and it'd be sorted. Well, that's a bit better, isn't it? The question is now though, will it still clear when you torque the bolts down? And is Rob willing to throw a full set of bolts in it and ruin his brand new gasket to find out?
You'll have to, won't I?
It's hitting. Oh, at least you know. Yeah, so those few little bashes that Rob did then should have hopefully marked the sump, so you can definitely see where it's hitting.
Boom, boom.
You can clearly see where it's marked. This sump has obviously been modified at some point. The only answer really is to mod this again to give more clearance inside. But yeah, at least he knows exactly where it's not clearing now. You know, where he's ground that away already today trying to get clearance, it hasn't even gone through the first skin. And obviously it's got 2 skins of plates welded on there. So he could probably keep grinding until it does clear. You'll get it to work. It's good that we got the decompression plate fitted today. You know, progress is progress. So at the moment, what's the next plans? You were saying you want to get the engine bay sprayed soonish, certainly before the engine goes back in. But I know you want to paint the engine up beforehand as well. Rob was also talking about the radiator and the intercooler. I think we mentioned this briefly in the last video. Obviously, some cutting away is probably going to need to be done here to get a big rad and intercooler in there. Don't want like the intercooler hanging out the front and all that, do you? Like, you know, next time we come down here, who knows, the engine bay will be painted. Yeah, Rob's actually thinking of getting the cover hydro dipped, like what I did with Maud's new ST170 engine. Mine was done by Little Red Fiesta. But yeah, it's been good to come back down here and see the 100E again, you know, now that the lockdown restrictions have been eased slightly. As I mentioned in the last video, this car is like a bit more than just a car to Rob and his wife. They're hoping that once this is out, you know, doing runs at Santa Pod and goodness knows what, they're hoping to use the car as a way to raise money for cystic fibrosis charities, which is something that's obviously close to Rob and his wife Jodie's heart. But that was all explained in the other video we done, so yeah, definitely check that video out if you haven't already done so. Right, I need to get out of here, so I'm going to end this video here. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new and you want to keep up to date with all my future uploads, and check the links in the description to my social media and my email address and all that. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.